Hello, and welcome to the Let's Talk About Why podcast. I'm your host, Tara Zimmer, and I'm so glad you decided to tune in today. Here at the Let's Talk About Why podcast, we answer that age-old question, why? Behind every great business, book, leader, and idea, there's a why, and we're here to talk about it. Hi everyone, and welcome to the first solo episode, video and audio podcast of the Let's Talk About Why podcast. So glad that you're here today. We are going to be doing something different. As I mentioned in the final episode of 2024, we will have one interview episode each month and one solo episode. I originally thought I would probably do those solo episodes as a recap of what the previous episode was or some thoughts that I didn't get to share, and I may do that sometimes. I may expound upon those episodes, but this week, I just really felt like I wanted to share what has been ruminating in my heart and where my mind and my prayer life and devotional life has been this week with all of you to see if maybe it resonated with you. I've encountered people that it seems like this might be something that others are dealing with as well. So I'm actually going to read. So this, I don't think I'll do this every time, but I'm going to directly be reading from a devotional that I wrote back in 2019. It's called Walk Worthy. It's a 5-day devotional, just a short little read. You can actually get it as a free download if you go to my website, Walkworthy, or it's tarazimmer.com, and it's the Walkworthy download. So anywhere on the website, it'll just pop up when you go to my website, tarazimmer.com again. It'll pop up there. You can put your email address in, it'll email it to you, and you can just download, and you can read this devotional along with several others. The 5 topics in here are just things that the Lord has really worked on in my life in multiple ways and multiple times that I've just really felt like they're lessons that I struggle to learn, I guess. And so he keeps having to teach me. So self-imposed deadlines, so things that we think, timings that we think God should meet our needs, waiting, fear, trust, and identity are the 5 topics that I touch on in this devotional. So if any of those are things that resonate with you, go ahead and download that. I call it Walk Worthy because my favorite verse is Ephesians 4:1, which is Paul saying, I, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you've been called. And so I think that these are topics that it's really hard to walk through these things in our individual lives, and we all walk through these difficult things. And it's not about not experiencing them or erasing them, but it's about walking worthy of the call, and it's an example for others and how a godly person works through those things. And so I hope that it's a blessing to you. So download that if you would like to. Today we're going to be reading the one on fear because that's just something I've seen a lot of people expressing, especially on social media the last few weeks. And I've felt it myself. There's just a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things going on in my personal life, in the world around us. And so I can find myself going back to this struggle. And so I just want to share it with you, and I hope that it encourages you as well. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. Isaiah 43:1, NASB. Fear has been one of the primary motivators of my life for as long as I can remember. However, until a few years ago, I wasn't aware just how much fear had impacted my life. If you look at me on the outside on a normal day, you probably won't see much evidence of fear. But just below the surface, there are almost debilitating fears I've dealt with my entire life. Fear of being alone, fear of failure, fear of having a bad reputation, fear of mishearing God, fear of not being seen or heard, fear of being successful, fear of not being a good steward, fear of not having enough money, fear of not fulfilling my potential, fear of letting those who care about me down. The list could go on, and that doesn't even include fears of the moment. This isn't a new feeling or struggle, though. Fear is something that has prevented God's best in lives since the beginning of time. One day, as I was preparing to preach at a church, it suddenly hit me how much fear played a part of the lives of the Israelites. You might know the story of Joseph. I actually talk about it in the devotional before this, but 400 years after Joseph was in Egypt. And if you know that story, if you don't know that story, download my devotional and you can get a little recap of that. But Joseph was a second in command in Egypt, and he was Jewish, and he was an Israelite. And so the Israelites moved there during famine, and there were many of them. So 400 years later, they are just part of the Egyptian culture, and they're part of the society there and have lived there for generations at this point. But scripture tells us in Exodus chapter 1 that a new Pharaoh rose to power who didn't know of Joseph. And because there were so many Israelites in Egypt, this Pharaoh was very fearful that they would overtake the Egyptians for some reason. So he enslaved them. But God told them that he would send someone to deliver them. I can't imagine the fear and discouragement that the Israelites faced waiting for God to deliver them while going through so much physical hurt and pain. And for a long time, some of them didn't get to see deliverance. But what the Israelites struggled to see, what they struggled to hold on to, was that God was preparing to lead them out of slavery. He was preparing Moses. You may know the story of Moses, a child meant to be killed, but rescued by the Egyptian princess and raised to be a leader and prince in Egypt. When Moses was older and saw how the Israelites were being treated by the Egyptians, he acted very rashly and killed one of the Egyptians who was beating an Israelite. Out of fear for his life, he fled from Egypt and lived in Midian for several years. When God called Moses to deliver the Israelites, he was not at all excited. He didn't want to serve as God's messenger to Pharaoh. Moses was afraid that Pharaoh wouldn't listen to him. He was afraid that his words wouldn't come out properly. We believe he had some sort of stutter or speech impediment, but we're not sure. It just caused him, it was part of why he was afraid to obey God, even as God showed Moses his miraculous power. After Moses finally agreed to obey God, God partnered Moses with his brother Aaron to be Moses' mouthpiece. And God used Moses powerfully. Yet Moses was still afraid. After God showed himself in a burning bush and demonstrated miracles beyond anything Moses could conceive, Moses still didn't believe that he was the right person for this job. In Exodus chapter 5, after Moses attempts to persuade Pharaoh to free the Israelites, Pharaoh treated the Israelites even worse, just to prove his power over them. Moses then runs to God, doubting that he was ever the right person to be called to this task, and laments that God would do this to him, put him in this position. How quickly we can forget God's power, even in, or maybe especially in the midst of him working a powerful plan. Have you ever been in a circumstance where it seemed like God was nowhere to be found, and you were without the ability to handle what surrounded you? I have. And it seems like those are the times when God grows and stretches me the most. Those are also the times when he works in and through me in ways I will only be able to see when looking back. I love to journal. This isn't in the devotional, a little extra. I love to journal, and looking back at journals I've written over the years, I'm always amazed at the things that I've said. Sometimes I'll think the wisdom that I don't have now that somehow I had then, the strength that I had going through that situation, or the insight that I experienced. It's not because of me, but because of the strength that God has and shares with me in those moments and shares with you. We have strength in him, not in our own strength. We have the ability to do what he calls us to do and to fulfill the things that he places in front of us because of him, not because of ourselves. Yes, we're to be ready in season and out of season, but to have the ability to have the strength in the moment, that comes from him. So back to the devotional. After 12 plagues, the release of the Israelites, the parting of the Red Sea, and the destruction of the Egyptians who chased after them, I imagine Moses was baffled that he could have ever doubted God. But we do doubt God, don't we? Even when he tells us what he will do and how he will do it. And much like Moses, we have the choice to follow God's calling, to lead, or to back out and wait for him to use someone else. I think Moses was probably very thankful he didn't let fear take him out of the calling God had for him. And I pray that we will be able to look back on our own lives and say the same about the things God has called us to do. So I just want to pray over you and what God has called you to do and encourage you. Heavenly Father, thank you for wanting to use us in your plan. Help us to walk confidently in who you've made us to be and what you've called us to do, even when facing fearful circumstances. Guide us, direct us, so that we are prepared for whatever you ask of us in all seasons. Fear can cause us to make decisions we wouldn't normally make. It can keep us from amazing experiences if we let it. As you walk through your day, I encourage you to choose one thing that you fear and take it on head first. Start small, tackle something inconsequential, and work your way up. If you learn to conquer your small fears today, it will make it easier to say yes to God tomorrow. If there's something in your life maybe the Lord has placed in front of you that you're afraid to do, even if a conversation, an encouragement, whatever it might be, I just encourage you to walk confidently in whatever God has placed on your heart and be who he's called you to be. Walk worthy of the calling with which he's called you. I hope this was encouraging to you. I hope that it gives you a little perspective as you navigate whatever circumstances you might be in today. God bless. Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed the show, hit subscribe so you won't miss an episode. And I would so appreciate if you took a moment to review the podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. That way others can find the show too. If you'd like to connect with me outside of the show, you can find me on socials, especially Instagram and Facebook. I'm at Tara C. Zimmer in all the places. Thanks again and see you next time.